Welcome back, everyone. All right, listen. So I have a correction to make. Something that I put out yesterday needs to be corrected. I will make that at the end of this In Focus. For now, I do want to cover something very important, which is this color revolution narrative versus reality. And this really is the battle at a big picture strategic level. This is the battle if you're the Trump administration facing down at least a protest movement, trying to transition into an organized resistance movement, and potentially transitioning into an actual color revolutionary movement. So to reiterate from yesterday, broadly, my baseline expectation right now is for the next 3+ years into the November elections can be summed up in this 3-phase strategy that I think we're seeing, which is protest, which is happening now, resistance, which is, I think, about to start in earnest. We have seen some, probably a tick up in the intensity of direct action. I think it will continue, obviously worsen into 2026 through and past the midterms, and then into 28 as well. And then this revolution, this color revolution, which would be 28, probably post-election, 28 to 29. I don't think that's a foregone conclusion, this revolution. I think there's some conditions where this may not happen. But we are seeing this phased campaign, which is required because this movement has to be organized, and then they also have to organize support for the resistance and the revolution phases. And both of those take time and energy and manpower and resources to build. This is not just something, you can't just go from 0 to 60 or 0 to 100. You got to start out by going 5 or 10 miles an hour. And that's where we are. And on a scale of 1 to 100, we're probably cruising at about, 20, 30 miles an hour right now. But the foot is on the accelerator, I think, with that finish line probably being the 2028 election. So I don't think a color revolution is an inevitability, but if a MAGA candidate wins a contested election, a color revolution becomes far more likely. Also, some people over the past, couple of weeks as I've been really hammering this on social media, they have pointed out that these main organizations like Indivisible and 5051, that they are these groups that are involved in the national protest movement. They say, oh, but Mike, they aren't talking about or promoting a color revolution. It's like, oh, Mike is just making all this stuff up. And it's kind of like, well, duh. The revolution phase of this is the unspoken part, because you cannot come out and widely advertise that's what you want until certain conditions enable you to be open about it. And eventually they will become open about it. Another reason is because you may not actually need one if the MAGA movement is defeated electorally in the midterms and or in 2028. Also, one reason, Gene Sharp points this out in his book, From Dictatorship to Democracy. One reason why a color revolution has to be predominantly nonviolent is because you need mass appeal, and armed violence does not appeal to the masses. Protest, relatively low risk action, or at least action where these activists or protesters can choose their level of risk or choose their level of involvement, is much more appealing than saying, here's a rifle, go shoot these people, because you really can't choose your level of risk there. Remember, we're looking at a dial here, not a switch. And so if you want mass mobilization protests, you have to provide a course of action to these people that is palatable. And joining a national protest movement is palatable. At the same time, you continue to create beliefs or condition certain beliefs that make them more enthusiastic or make them more amenable to higher risk in the future. And so I think they will get to this point. And honestly, I'm not saying that this mid-decade redistricting plan is necessarily a bad idea, because I do think Republicans are saying, well, we're doing this because these other blue states are gerrymandered, and because of the 2020 census, there are so many blue districts that are artificially apportioned. They have higher representation because of the presence of illegal aliens, that the Republicans say, well, it's not Republicans tipping the scales here or messing up the balance. It's the Democrats who've already done this. At any rate, this color revolution is supposed to be a non-violent movement to overthrow and replace a sitting government. So that is square one, is square zero. This is an actual revolution. When they talk about overthrowing and replacing a sitting government, historically we're talking about authoritarian or fascist dictatorships. And they do this primarily through mass mobilization protests and these public displays of mass political defiance. Remember, they want to popularize undermining the authority of the administration or undermining the authority of maybe an incoming administration. And then they also conduct other forms of political warfare. So this predominantly nonviolent approach is part of what gives them the moral authority. And that is the currency in anything like popular revolutions, and especially these color revolutions. That is the currency of their movement, because they're supposedly the peaceful protesters opposing the brutal dictatorial regime. And that is the framing that they have to maintain and popularize. A plurality or a majority of Americans have to come to believe this, that they're the victims fighting against oppression. And when they can make that claim credibly, so when that claim gets repeated on the news night after night after night for months or years on end, and that message just gets hammered into the American zeitgeist, their movement gains moral authority and legitimacy because they're the victim. And that is the narrative that they have to create. And when you come to realize that is one of their centers of gravity, that's probably one of the main centers of gravity. Once you realize that, then you come to the conclusion, it's unavoidable. You come to the conclusion that they're going to exploit every single instance of state and non-state violence against them, to include baiting or inciting violence against them, selectively editing video footage of encounters with police, otherwise propagandizing all instances that reinforce that narrative. And some people have brought up this idea of false flags. And yes, that does happen in color revolutions. Yes, you do have one side attacking itself just to blame the other. I'm not saying that will happen here, but when it does, I mean, you just look at people going off the rails and believing all sorts of wacky stuff in this country. And I think there's a very good chance that our information environment becomes so congested, and I think it's going to get ugly. So over the next 3 years, you're very likely going to see levels of propaganda far worse than what we saw from 2017 to 2020. And they're going to do this in order to reinforce this peaceful and patriotic narrative, despite the revolutionary reality. Remember, this is a revolution if they continue it to its logical end. So this claim that they're peaceful protesters and they're the good guys fighting against the bad guys is what we call a center of gravity for this movement. And a center of gravity could be an individual, like a key leader, it could be a method of operations, it could be a belief, or any kind of environmental or operational condition that an organization needs to maintain power or to keep up their fight, to keep up our operations, to continue to what's called seize and maintain the initiative in battle. And when you seize the initiative, it means you're going on the offensive and you are making decisions and you are dictating the conditions to your adversary and you're forcing them to react. And so I think a big part of this is who can seize the initiative. Is it going to be this color revolution movement forcing the administration into reaction? And remember, 9 times out of 10, action beats reaction. Or will it be the Trump administration seizing the initiative and turning the tables on this color revolution? And even, right now, I would say because a color revolution takes years to build, in most cases, years, I think we can call this a color revolution. They're not to the end phase yet, but moving into the organized resistance phase is obviously noteworthy. And I think this would also probably justify the Trump administration into some form of action or reaction. So that's what a center of gravity is, something that they absolutely need to maintain. And so this claim that they're the victims fighting against the oppressive dictator, that is their center of gravity. If they can anchor this message and make that the perceived reality for a plurality or a majority of Americans, then they will gain the popular support that's required to sustain their operations against the bad guys and eventually win. So this is really as much a psychological and mental and emotional battle as it is political. So if you're the Trump administration or you're a part of any other counter-revolutionary effort, you have to attack this movement's. I think there's one up top. I mean, this is the big domino. There is one center of gravity that must be addressed. And then there are probably two other smaller centers of gravity that will progress if this big domino gets topped over. And so this first and maybe the only center of gravity, this is the big domino. If this gets knocked over, the two other centers of gravity will become far more important. This first, the big domino, is the 2028 election. It has to be won legitimately, and the results have to be accepted and popularly perceived as being free and fair. The Trump administration and the states that are overseeing the elections have to maintain legitimacy and credibility. It cannot be violated or cannot be grossly violated. A contested election carries a very high risk of experiencing a color revolution. If a MAGA candidate wins, you will have these people saying Trump stole the election for his acolyte, J.D. Vance, his fascist in waiting, and we're not going to allow this to happen. This is effectively what they're going to say. On the other hand, if you do have a general election that is widely perceived as being free and fair, it's going to be very difficult for these people to popularly characterize the election as being illegitimate or being stolen or being won illegally. So legitimacy is key here, the legitimacy of the outcome of this election. One major problem for the Trump administration is there's this constellation of quote unquote pro-democracy groups and election watchdogs. And I think they have previously exhibited a bias. And so the problem is when you have if you're the Trump administration, you may have a free and fair election, and a MAGA candidate may win this free and fair presidential election. But when you have this group of election NGOs saying, no, this election was stolen, and that message gets pushed up into the media, you create this scenario of who are you going to believe? And this is why conditioning certain beliefs is so important. This is psychological operations is nothing more than marketing and advertising. And the reason why you see Coke billboards and commercials on TV is because these companies are trying to condition certain beliefs in you. They're trying to condition you to drink Coke on a hot day, or to buy this cologne, or to wear these jeans because it makes you look good. And if you believe that these jeans will make you look good, you will go out and buy these jeans. And this is the exact same process in political warfare. If you believe that the person who claims to have won the election won it illegally, if you believe that, then your next action would be, well, if this guy's not legitimate, we need to replace him with someone who is. And this is the process. This is what you're going to see over the next few years, but especially going into the 2028 elections. Now, if that big domino falls, if this election is contested, you're going to have the second center of gravity, which is the narrative surrounding this color revolution. And I'm going to get to that here in just a second. But briefly, I think arguably you can claim that another center of gravity, and I don't want to get into this thing where there's like 5 or 6 or 10 centers of gravity, because really there's a very small number. That's why it's called a center of gravity. But if there were to be a third, I would say it's probably financial backing, because national organization and mobilization requires a lot of work, a lot of manpower and resources, and that costs a lot of money. And so remember, mobilizing is just activating your base. Organizing is expanding your base. That's why we are still in the organizing phase of this color revolution, they have to get, they have to grow. They have to grow considerably because remember, they want to get this 3.5% mark, which is about 11 or 12 million Americans. I don't know how many people they have on their email and outreach lists. They claim that 5 million people turned out for No Kings 1.0 back in June. No Kings 2.0 is coming up on Saturday, the 18th of October. They want it to be bigger and better. So they want more than 5 million people to turn out. I think they probably got 3 million on No Kings 1.0. So they're 3, maybe 5 million out of 12. So I think that's a very good yardstick when you look at the movement. Now let's get back to the narrative. If you're going to attack this narrative that they're the peaceful good guys and Trump's the evil fascist bad guy, the reason why either side wants to control the media, and that's either mass media, broadcast media, or social media, is because those are the largest distribution channels for your message. And the more people that you can reach, remember, this is a battle over conditioning beliefs in the American people. When you can reach more people with your compelling message, the more support you can gain. And when you have mass support, you have legitimacy, because that's what legitimacy is. It is the perceived rightful authority. Who is president, or whose laws are we going to follow, or which side are we going to follow? That is where that's the battle of legitimacy. So this claim that the protesters are innocent and peaceful good guys is ultimately what has to be countered and deconstructed if you're trying to defeat a color revolution. Now, to repeat or reiterate, the ability to commit armed violence is not the decisive factor in this conflict. Your AR-15s are very good at solving a very narrow number of problems. They're not very good at solving anything else. In fact, they make most other problems even worse. So the Safe Queens and the 10,000 rounds of ammo, effectively, other than self-defense, effectively useless in this fight, because this fight is political, social, and economic. It is not kinetic, certainly not conventional. So the decisive factor is this ability to condition and reinforce beliefs that the MAGA candidate won a free and fair presidential election, that this protest movement is nefarious and malicious. The organizations, the organizers and the backers are communist revolutionaries. They're not pro-democracy freedom fighters. That these individual protesters may be patriotic, maybe they're well-meaning, but they're being duped and exploited. And that America, the America that we know and love, is going to end if this revolution succeeds. That is the decisive factor. Whichever side wins, the revolution side or the counter-revolution side, they're going to win because a plurality or a majority of this country is going to believe what I just told you, one way or the other. They're going to believe that's all true. They're going to believe the exact opposite. So that's the fight ahead for the Trump administration heading into the 2028 elections, and especially the presidential transition period, because I think that's the day after the election is probably when these claims of a stolen election, always, they're going to pop up. And whether they gain traction or not, I don't know. We'll see. But this presidential transition period is going to be absolutely critical for this color revolution. So if you're the Trump administration, you have to ensure the 28 election is free and fair. One problem maybe for Trump, he cannot give the appearance, not even the appearance. He should just shut up, or maybe not shut up about the election, but he cannot give the appearance of undue influence over the election outcome. If he does, that's just going to be feeding the fire and creating a reason to justify certain beliefs. So that's the message that they have to put out. They literally have to win the election legitimately. Now, tactically, we're talking about big picture strategic stuff. Tactically, how you can select how you want to convey that message, because the American public has to be convinced of this reality. That's the strategic aim. The tactical aim is that I think everyone plays a role in this, one way or the other. Every American can play a role. And every American's job in this conflict is to inform and influence their neighbors and their friends and their family and their colleagues and members of this community and anyone else they can reach. This is why social media influence is going to be such a big deal. If you're on the MAGA side, you have to convince all those people and help them see this color revolution for what it actually is. And it's not about freedom. I think it is effectively about control. I mean, let's remember just a year ago, under the Biden administration, all the things that they were doing. It's not about freedom. It's about control. The people pushing this color revolution want to control you. And it is not a fight against a fascist dictator, at least not yet. Maybe it will be, but it's not right now. And I don't think it will be. It's a revolutionary movement that wants to put people in power who are going to end America as we've known it. I mean, just look at the lawlessness on the border for amnesty, for political votes to gain a one-party rule in this country. That would have been, obviously catastrophic. It pretty much was catastrophic for our country. And now, and this other side just wants to seal the deal. So that's take on narrative versus reality. And some of the things I think the Trump administration and the counter-revolutionary side can do to combat this. Now, yesterday I did make a mistake, and I apologize, but I do want to run through this briefly. Looking at the numbers, and I looked at these numbers different ways and sliced them up a bunch of different ways, and unfortunately made an error in yesterday's report. But I do want to correct the record. All right, let's talk about color revolution success rates. Of the classic color revolutions since the year 2000, 7 were successful, 2 failed, for a success rate of about 78%. Of the classic color revolution since 2000 that also coincided with national elections, that success rate drops to about 67%. Okay, so we're looking at color revolution since 2000, and then since 1986, and then we're getting a cross-section of color revolutions that also coincided with national elections. Now, when we turn the clock back and we look at color revolution since 1986, 14 successful, 3 failed. That's a success rate of about 82%. Color revolutions going back to 1986 that also coincided with national elections, that success rate is about 67%. So our pie charts should look something like this. One other caveat here. There is some academic disagreement over which revolutions could be classified as color revolutions in the classical sense versus edge cases. And I've got this spreadsheet, and I'll give you the data eventually. Once I've picked through here with a fine-tooth comb and make sure it's fit for publication. I have 9 classical color revolutions since 2000. There's another 9 edge cases that maybe they were, maybe they weren't. They certainly exhibited some characteristics. And then 8 that predate 2000. The bulldozer revolution in Serbia in 2000 is considered to be the first true color revolution. Although going back to the 1980s, there are some that you could probably say, yes, this was a proto-color revolution before we called them color revolutions, because they have those core characteristics. So last point here, the combined success rate for all 26 of these cases is about 69%. So 18 out of 26. On the whole, those aren't bad odds. And so this is something that needs to be taken very seriously, because under certain conditions, I think we will see this happen. And by the way, and let me just reiterate, sometimes I write this stuff and I talk about it. I'm like, Mike, this sounds so extreme. But you go back to what these people say, even their reading lists and the stuff they're putting out and the buzzwords that they're using, the terminology and their strategy, that as soon as these individual people started talking about attacking the 6 pillars of a fascist regime or an authoritarian regime, I immediately connected that to Serbia, because I was like, that's exactly what the Serbians were saying, the Otpor movement, attacking the 6 pillars. So it's the exact same strategy as all these other color revolutions. It goes back to George Sharp. So at any rate, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, I'm just going to call it a duck. We're looking at a color revolution here. All right, with that, thanks for